She was 84 years old. She lived alone in a quiet desert neighborhood where the only light at night came from the stars. She had survived widowhood, raised 3 children by herself, spent more than 50 years building a life in Tucson, Arizona. She was sharp. She was faithful. She was loved. And on the night of January 31st, 2026, Nancy Ellen Guthrie vanished from her home without a trace. What followed has become one of the most gripping, heartbreaking, and confounding missing person cases in recent American memory. A case that has drawn the attention of the FBI, the White House, millions of online observers, and an entire nation desperate for answers. A case that has exposed cracks in local law enforcement, tested the limits of forensic technology, and forced one of America's most recognized television journalists to step away from the cameras and become not a reporter of tragedy, but a daughter living through one. This is the full story, not speculation, not rumor, not the manufactured drama of clickbait headlines or AI-generated misinformation. This is the documented, fact-checked, verified account of what happened to Nancy Guthrie, what investigators have found, what remains unknown, and why this case matters far beyond the borders of Tucson. If you are new here, welcome, and please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment what you feel about this case. We do not chase sensationalism. We chase truth. And in this case, the truth is more unsettling than any fiction could be, because as of today, more than 60 days after Nancy Guthrie disappeared, no suspect has been named. No arrest has been made. No motive has been confirmed, and Nancy has not been found. Let us go back to the beginning. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky, a small community just across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. She grew up there, attended Catholic all-girls schools for both her elementary and high school education, and went on to enroll at the University of Kentucky. While at college, she was not just a student. She worked with the student-run newspaper, the Kentucky Colonel, as a society editor and staff member, covering Greek life for the publication. Even decades before her daughter would become one of the most famous journalists in America, Nancy was already drawn to the world of storytelling and communication. It was at the University of Kentucky that Nancy met the man who would change her life. On a blind date at a basketball game, she met Charles Errol Guthrie. As Savannah Guthrie would later recount on the Today Show, her mother looked at Charles and said, in that moment, that he was the man she was going to marry. And she was right. Nancy and Charles married on December 28, 1963. Charles was a mining engineer, a Georgia Tech graduate by way of Pineville, Kentucky. His work took the young couple around the world. They lived in Melbourne, Australia, where their youngest daughter, Savannah, was born on December 27, 1971. The Guthries moved to Tucson about 2 years later and settled into a burnt adobe home in the Catalina Foothills near Campbell Avenue and Skyline Drive to raise their kids. Together, Nancy and Charles had 3 children. Savannah, the youngest, who would go on to become co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. Annie, the eldest, a poet, jeweler, and teacher. And Cameron, who built a career in the military and intelligence. The family was rooted. They were close. The children were shaped profoundly by their parents' values, by the quiet rhythms of desert life, and by the deep faith that Nancy carried through everything. Then everything shattered. On June 10, 1988, Charles Guthrie died suddenly at the age of 49 during a work trip to Mexico. He suffered a fatal heart attack. Nancy was 46. Savannah was 16, about to start her senior year of high school. In a single day, the family's foundation cracked, and Nancy became the person who had to hold everything together. She did. According to everyone who knew her, she did it with extraordinary grace. As Savannah put it in an on-air tribute for her mother's 80th birthday in 2022, Nancy had met unthinkable challenges in her life with grit, without self-pity, with determination, and always with unshakable faith. In the years after Charles's death, Nancy went to work. She was employed at the University of Arizona from 1990 until January 1, 2007. Her work there was meaningful. She initially served as a spokesperson for the University Medical Center. Before becoming an associate to the vice president of university advancement, she organized programs that brought musicians to perform for hospital staff and patients. She ran a program called MedCamp, designed to introduce Arizona high school students to the medical field. A former colleague described her as someone who made work upbeat and fun while being a good leader. Meanwhile, her children thrived. Savannah and her sister chose to go to college close to home, so their mother would not be alone. Both attended the University of Arizona. Savannah later earned a law degree before returning to journalism, eventually rising to the pinnacle of broadcast news as co-anchor of the Today Show. Annie became a published author and teacher. Cameron served his country in the military, and through it all, Nancy remained in the same house. Property records show that Nancy purchased the home in 1975 for just $85,000. She stayed there for more than 50 years. The house became more than a structure. It was a repository of memory, a place where birthdays were celebrated, where grief was processed, where grandchildren played. It was the center of the Guthrie family universe. By 2026, Nancy was 84 years old. According to family members, she was mentally sharp and independent. Living alone in her home in the Catalina Foothills, she had limited mobility and required daily medication for chronic conditions, including heart issues, managed with a pacemaker. But she was active. She attended church regularly. She played mahjong with friends. She was part of a book club. She watched her grandson. She was, by every account, a woman who had built a beautiful life in the second half of her years. In a segment filmed in November of 2025, Nancy described the quality of life in her community as laid back and gentle. She laughed about watching javelinas eat her plants. It was a quiet life, a safe life, the kind of life that makes what happened next almost incomprehensible. Now we arrive at the night that changed everything. January 30th, 2026, a Saturday evening in Tucson, Arizona. Nancy Guthrie had dinner with her daughter Annie and Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni. It was a family evening. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. According to Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, Nancy traveled to a local family home for dinner at approximately 5:32 in the evening. She was dropped off back at her home at approximately 9:48 that night. Cioni ensured she made it inside the house safely before leaving. Her garage door closed at approximately 9:50. That was the last confirmed moment Nancy Guthrie was seen alive and safe. The hours that followed remain a void, a gap in the record that investigators have spent months trying to fill. For several hours after the garage door closed, the home appeared quiet. No unusual activity was recorded on nearby surveillance systems. The desert neighborhood, without streetlights, settled into its usual darkness. Then, in the early morning hours of February 1st, something happened. According to the Pima County Sheriff, a doorbell camera at Nancy's home disconnected at approximately 1:47 in the morning. At around 2:12, one of the home's cameras detected what the system classified as a person. But here is the critical detail that would haunt the investigation for days. Nancy did not have an active subscription to the camera service, and so the data was overwritten. No video was initially available from that detection. The morning came. Nancy did not appear for a scheduled live stream of a church service, which was a routine she followed regularly. A member of her church contacted the family to report that she had not appeared as expected. Worry set in quickly. Relatives went to her home around 11 in the morning to check on her, searched the house and surrounding property, and found no sign of her. Around noon, the family called 911. When deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived, they found a scene that immediately suggested this was not a simple case of a wandering elderly woman. Nancy's personal belongings, including her phone and other essential items, were still inside the home. There was blood, not massive quantities, but enough to alarm investigators. The blood was later confirmed through DNA testing to be Nancy's, and there was a critical concern. Nancy needed daily medication. Sheriff Nanos stated publicly that it could be fatal if she did not take her medication every 24 hours. The clock was already ticking. Within hours, the case escalated from a missing person report to a criminal investigation. Sheriff Nanos stated that there were clues at the crime scene indicating that Nancy did not leave on her own. Investigators began treating this as an abduction. Now, before we continue with the investigation, we must address something important. Because in the days and weeks that followed Nancy's disappearance, something toxic began to grow alongside the legitimate search for answers. Misinformation. A network of spam websites and Facebook pages based in Vietnam began generating AI-created false stories targeting Americans. These fabricated articles claimed that Nancy's son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, had been blockaded in his home by police, that he was a prime suspect, that police had seized vehicles from his property. None of it was true. There was no evidence that police had surrounded Cioni's home or that he had been identified as a suspect. The misinformation spread like wildfire. It was reposted thousands of times. It shaped public opinion, and it caused real harm to real people. Let us be absolutely clear about the verified facts regarding Tommaso Cioni. He is Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law, married to her eldest daughter, Annie. He is 50 years old, Italian-born, and has lived in Arizona since 2006. He has worked as a biology teacher at Basis Oro Valley, and is also a poet and musician. He was confirmed by the sheriff as the last person to see Nancy before her disappearance, having dropped her off at her home that Saturday evening. Sheriff Nanos released a statement saying all members of Nancy Guthrie's family, including siblings and spouses, have been cleared as possible suspects. His exact words were stark and direct. To suggest otherwise is not only wrong, it is cruel. Authorities confirmed that Cioni fully cooperated with the investigation, passed a polygraph test, and is not considered a suspect. And yet, the internet did not care about verified facts. Speculation hardened into accusation in comment sections and true crime forums. Cioni's name was dragged through digital mud by people who had never met him, never spoken to an investigator, and never bothered to check whether the stories they were sharing were real. The competitor transcript that circulated online went even further. It fabricated an entire narrative in which Cioni confessed to disconnecting Nancy's pacemaker, admitted to destroying cameras, was indicted, tried, and convicted. It described a 22-year prison sentence. It described pacemaker telemetry data, vehicle detour GPS logs, and a desert search. None of it happened. Every single one of those claims is fiction. This is not a minor distinction. When fabricated confession narratives and invented trial proceedings are presented as fact in a missing person case, they do not help find the missing person. They contaminate public understanding. They pollute the information environment. They potentially interfere with the actual investigation. And they inflict additional suffering on a family already enduring the worst experience of their lives. Savannah Guthrie addressed this directly during an emotional interview. She described suggestions that someone close to her mother could be responsible as unbearable, saying it piles pain upon pain and there are no words. She added that no one took better care of her mother than her sister and brother-in-law, and no one protected her mother more than her brother. Now, let us return to what actually happened in the investigation. On February 4th, Savannah Guthrie and her siblings, Annie and Cameron, appeared together in a video statement posted to social media. It was the first time they addressed the public. Savannah said the family was aware of reports concerning a ransom letter and directed her remarks to whoever was responsible, saying the family was ready to talk. She emphasized that in a world where voices and images can be easily manipulated, the family needed confirmation that Nancy was alive. That same week, ransom notes began surfacing. TMZ and 2 Tucson television news stations received what appeared to be a ransom note demanding millions of dollars in Bitcoin. The FBI was unable to immediately verify its authenticity. It was later reported that the ransom demand was $6 million. With a deadline of 5 p.m. on February 9th. On February 7th, the family released another video. This one was different in tone, more cryptic, more desperate. Savannah said they had received a message and they understood. She begged for her mother's return, saying, "This is the only way we will have peace. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay. The deadlines came and went. No proof of life was provided. No exchange took place. The ransom notes became one of the most puzzling elements of the case. On February 5th, a California man was arrested on federal charges, alleging he had posed as an abductor and demanded ransom from the Guthrie family. Authorities stated that this scheme was unrelated to the other ransom demands. It was an opportunistic scam. A man named Derek Calella, 42, from California, allegedly exploited the family's agony for personal gain. But the other ransom notes, the ones the family responded to, remained an open question. Savannah later said during an interview that she believed the two notes the family directly received and responded to were real, though most of the others were not. Then came the breakthrough that electrified the nation. On February 10th, 10 days after Nancy disappeared, the FBI released surveillance footage that had previously been deemed inaccessible. FBI Director Kash Patel stated that the video was recovered from residual data located in back-end systems. It was a technical feat. The footage came from Nancy's Google Nest doorbell camera. Because she did not have a paid subscription, the video should have been overwritten. But through days of intensive work between the FBI and Google, fragments were recovered. What the footage showed stunned the nation. The video captured a masked, armed individual approaching Nancy's front door. The person wore a full face mask, gloves, and a backpack. What appeared to be a flashlight was held in their mouth. A gun sat in a holster at the front of their waist. The person was seen placing a gloved hand over the camera lens, then using a nearby shrub to further conceal the device. The images were chilling. They showed deliberation, preparation, familiarity. Law enforcement experts who analyzed the footage noted several critical details. The holster and its placement at the individual's groin area suggested someone without professional firearms training. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe stated that no person with law enforcement or military training would carry a firearm in a holster positioned like that. A retired FBI supervisory special agent described the holster weapon pairing as mismatched, noting it was a small concealment pistol placed in a holster designed for a much larger revolver. After a forensic review, investigators described the suspect as a man between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build, a black mustache, and wearing a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack. A further revelation emerged. One of the doorbell images was captured on a different date than the others, indicating the masked suspect had scouted the home in advance of the abduction. This was not a random crime. This was planned. The suspect had visited Nancy's property before. They knew where the cameras were. They knew the layout. Behavioral analysts reviewing the footage noted that the intruder's movements indicated more than just confidence. They suggested the suspect may have had prior knowledge of the home's layout. The release of the footage triggered an avalanche of tips. Thousands poured in. The White House weighed in, with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stating that President Trump had reviewed the imagery and encouraged anyone with information to contact the FBI. But the footage also triggered premature action. On the evening of February 10th, a man was detained during a traffic stop in Rio Rico, Arizona, about 60 miles south of Tucson near the Mexican border. A search warrant was executed on his home. The man, who identified himself as Carlos Palazuelos, was a delivery driver. He said agents told him he looked like the person seen in the surveillance footage. He was questioned for several hours, then released without charges. He stated he did not know who Nancy Guthrie was and was not involved in the kidnapping. It was a case of mistaken identity. Separately, the Pima County Sheriff's Department began an operation on February 13th at a residence 2 miles from Nancy's house. 2 people were removed from the residence, and roads in the area were closed for about 4 hours. 1 person was questioned and released. A gray Range Rover in a nearby parking lot was seized and towed. And then there were the gloves. Gloves that appeared to match those worn by the suspect were found by the FBI, but the DNA on them was eventually traced to a local restaurant worker whom the sheriff said was not considered part of the investigation. Dead end after dead end, lead after lead, dissolving into nothing. The DNA became both the greatest hope and the greatest frustration. Sheriff Nanos confirmed that unknown DNA from an unidentified person was found at Nancy's home. But it was not a simple sample. It was a mixture of DNA from multiple people, making analysis significantly more complex. The DNA profile was tested against more than 26 million entries in the FBI's criminal database. There was not a single match. This meant the suspect likely had no criminal convictions on record. Investigators turned to genetic genealogy, the same technique that cracked the Golden State Killer case and helped identify the suspect in the Idaho student murders. C.C. Moore, chief genetic genealogist at Parabon, expressed optimism that the unknown DNA could eventually be traced to a specific individual, but she cautioned that the process could take days, weeks, or even months. As weeks stretched into a month, and then two, the investigation settled into a quieter, but no less intense phase. The media presence in the Catalina Foothills mostly dissipated. The news vans were replaced by orange cones and parking restrictions. A sign outside Nancy's home asked the media to cover the tragedy from elsewhere so the neighborhood could have privacy, space, and dignity. But the memorial kept growing. Yellow flowers, messages and prayers for Nancy's safe return accumulated along the road outside her house. Community members continued to visit, adding fresh bouquets on top of those dried out by the Arizona sun. It became a physical manifestation of collective hope and heartbreak. On February 24th, Savannah released a video announcing a dramatic escalation. The family was offering a $1 million reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery, with the family's understanding that she had possibly already died. Though they remained hopeful, the FBI's $100,000 reward remained active. The combined reward stood at over $1.2 million, making it one of the largest rewards ever offered in a missing person case. On March 25th, nearly 2 months after the disappearance, Savannah Guthrie sat down for her first extended interview about what happened. She spoke with her former Today Show colleague, Hoda Kotb. It was raw. It was devastating. Savannah recounted how her brother Cameron, who spent his career in the military and intelligence, immediately recognized what was happening. He saw very clearly, right away, what this was. On the phone when she called him, he said he thought their mother had been kidnapped for ransom. When Savannah asked if he thought it was because of her fame, he said, "Sorry, sweetie, but yeah, maybe." Savannah said she found it too much to bear to think that she had brought this to her mother's bedside, but she was honest about the possibility. She acknowledged the family did not know for certain if her public profile was the motive, but said it would make sense if someone looked at Nancy and thought they could make money. She also addressed the ransom notes directly. Savannah said there were many different notes, and most of them were not real, but she believed the 2 notes the family received and responded to were genuine. Meanwhile, the investigation faced growing scrutiny, not just from the public, but from within law enforcement itself. An insider in the law enforcement community told that investigators initially rushed to judgment, assuming Nancy had wandered away from her home. The source said investigators stayed with that judgment and ran the investigation as if it were a search and rescue issue rather than a possible criminal one. Further reporting revealed that the first supervisor on scene had never previously investigated a homicide. The revelation sharpened scrutiny of the Pima County Sheriff's Department and its leader, Sheriff Chris Nanos. Former Surgeon General Richard Carmona and other critics publicly criticized Nanos for alleged incompetence, citing compromised crime scenes and the rejection of FBI laboratory resources. A union representing more than 300 deputies in the Pima County Sheriff's Office called for Nanos to resign after a unanimous no to confidence vote. According to the union, 241 members voted for no confidence and resignation, while 65 abstained and none chose confidence. The sheriff pushed back, insisting his department was doing everything possible. But the damage to public confidence was substantial. One detail that emerged during the scrutiny was particularly alarming. A pizza delivery driver was able to walk up to the door of Nancy's home without drawing the attention of sheriff's deputies stationed there. The incident raised questions about crime scene security and evidence preservation. Now let us talk about what makes this case so unusual, so confounding, so resistant to resolution. Former FBI special agent in charge Jody Weiss noted that kidnappings of elderly victims are exceedingly rare, with less than 0.2% of cases involving someone over 80. He pointed to the lack of proof of life, the suspect's masked and armed appearance, and the ransom emails sent to media outlets rather than directly to the family. He called it a really strange case with far more questions than answers. Consider the contradictions. This appears to be a kidnapping for ransom, yet no proof of life has been provided. The ransom notes were sent to media outlets like TMZ, rather than through private channels to the family. The suspect appeared armed and prepared, yet experts say the weapon handling was amateurish. The crime showed planning, with the suspect having scouted the home in advance, yet the execution left behind DNA evidence and surveillance footage. A retired FBI agent observed that the suspect likely had the flashlight in his mouth during the approach to the home, and probably removed it at some point, transferring DNA to the outside of his gloves and potentially to surfaces he touched. If true, the suspect's attempts at forensic countermeasures were incomplete. The terrain itself presents challenges. The Catalina Foothills community sits in vast desert, with towering saguaro cacti, long winding driveways, and deep privacy. The area behind Nancy's home is rugged and remote. A former SWAT commander who analyzed the terrain noted that navigating it at night would be extremely difficult, suggesting that whoever took Nancy likely exited through the front of the property rather than into the desert behind it. As of today, the investigation remains active. Pima County Sheriff Nanos has said investigators are still reviewing digital and forensic evidence. Gloves recovered near Nancy's home and blood found on the porch have been tested, with DNA samples being analyzed at labs across the country. The genetic genealogy testing continues. The surveillance footage continues to be analyzed, pixel by pixel. Investigators have been canvassing gun stores, working to track down the clothing and items seen on the suspect. The 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack has been identified. Walmart provided purchase records to investigators. Every lead, no matter how small, is being pursued. Former prosecutor Matt Murphy expressed confidence that the case would eventually be solved, stating that he believed investigators would eventually catch this individual. He pointed to the DNA evidence and the substantial reward as factors that could break the case open. Reporter Brian Enton, who has covered the case from the ground since the beginning, identified two potential paths to resolution. First, the $1 million reward could work, particularly if there was an accomplice or getaway driver who might eventually come forward. Second, the DNA. He noted that genetic genealogy databases could be used to find a distant relative of the suspect, then narrow down to the individual, as was done in the Koberger case, though it could take months or even a year. And so we wait. The nation waits. The Tucson community waits. And the Guthrie family waits. In her neighborhood, the memorial outside Nancy's home stretches yards along the road. People still come. They leave flowers. They leave prayers. They leave hope, however fragile. Savannah Guthrie is scheduled to return to the Today Show on April 6th, but she has warned it may be short-lived, that the pull of her mother's case may draw her back. During her interview, she said the family needs answers, that they cannot be at peace without knowing, and that someone can do the right thing, and it is never too late to do the right thing. Let us talk about why this case resonates so deeply. It is not simply because Savannah Guthrie is famous. Fame draws attention, yes, but attention does not sustain emotional investment for 60 days and counting. What sustains it is something more fundamental. Nancy Guthrie represents a category of person that every society has a moral obligation to protect. She is elderly. She is medically vulnerable. She lives alone. She is someone who gave decades of her life to her children, her community, her work, and her faith. She earned her quiet years. She earned her safety. And the violation of that safety strikes at something primal in the public consciousness. The idea that an 84-year-old grandmother can be taken from her own home in the dead of night, in her pajamas, without shoes, without her medicine, is an idea that makes people feel unsafe in a way that few crimes can. Because if it can happen to Nancy Guthrie in her gated desert community, with cameras on her door, with family nearby, then the illusion of safety that many Americans hold begins to dissolve. This case also raises urgent questions about elder vulnerability, about how we protect aging parents and grandparents in an era of increasing isolation. Nancy lived alone. She was independent. She was capable. But she was also physically limited, medically dependent, and living in a home without streetlights in a neighborhood where privacy was a selling point. The very features that made her community peaceful also made it vulnerable. And then there is the question of law enforcement competence. The allegations that investigators initially treated this as a wandering case rather than a criminal abduction have shaken public trust. The report that the first supervisor on scene had never investigated a homicide raises deeply troubling questions about resource allocation and training. The no-confidence vote by the deputies' union suggests these concerns are not merely external criticism, but internal recognition of systemic problems. These are not abstract policy questions. They are life and death questions. Every hour of delay in the first days of a kidnapping investigation dramatically reduces the probability of recovery. If investigators spent critical early hours searching for a wandering elderly woman rather than securing a crime scene and pursuing abduction protocols, those hours cannot be recovered. Let us also address the phenomenon that has surrounded this case. The rise of what some have called the mom detectives, the army of true crime enthusiasts, streamers, podcasters, and social media sleuths who have descended on this story. Some have provided genuine value, amplifying the family's pleas and keeping public attention focused. Others have done harm, spreading misinformation, harassing family members, and treating a real woman's disappearance as entertainment content. As one observer noted, true crime content brings in eyes, clicks, and even money. The line between public service and exploitation is thin, and in this case, it has been crossed repeatedly. The fabricated confession narrative in the competitor transcript is perhaps the most extreme example, but it is far from the only one. We must do better. As content creators, as consumers, as citizens. A missing person case is not a fictional drama to be embellished for engagement. It is a real family's nightmare. Every fabricated detail, every invented confession, every speculative accusation damages the information ecosystem that investigators depend on. It wastes time, it diverts resources, and it causes immeasurable suffering to people who are already in agony. Now what happens next? The investigation continues on multiple fronts. DNA analysis through genetic genealogy remains the most promising avenue. The technology that identified the Golden State Killer and the Idaho murder suspect works by matching DNA to distant relatives in genealogical databases, then building family trees to narrow down potential suspects. It is painstaking work. It requires time, but it has a remarkable track record of success. The surveillance footage continues to yield potential leads. Investigators are working to identify every item the suspect was wearing and carrying, from the Ozark Trail backpack to the mismatched holster to the clothing. Retail records are being examined. Purchase histories are being traced. The ransom note investigation continues separately. Cyber specialists are working to trace the origins of the communications, the cryptocurrency accounts referenced in the demands, and any digital fingerprints left behind by the sender. And the physical search has not ended. As investigators continue to sort through evidence, the Guthrie family maintains their $1 million reward. Tips continue to come in. The FBI and Pima County Sheriff's Department maintain their respective tip lines. We will provide an honest assessment. This case is difficult. The absence of a named suspect after more than 60 days is unusual. The lack of proof of life is deeply concerning. Medical experts have noted that Nancy's dependence on daily medication makes prolonged survival without treatment unlikely. The family has acknowledged this reality publicly, even as they continue to hope. But difficult? does not mean unsolvable. Cases have been broken months and even years after the initial disappearance. The Golden State Killer was identified decades after his crimes. Brian Kohberger was arrested weeks after the Idaho murders. Based largely on DNA evidence that required time to process, technology continues to advance. Tips continue to arrive. Someone knows something. That is not a platitude. It is a statistical certainty in a case of this nature. The suspect had to acquire the weapon, the holster, the backpack, the mask, the gloves. They had to scout the home in advance. They had to transport themselves to and from the scene. They may have had an accomplice. Someone in that chain of preparation and execution knows who this person is. The $1.2 million in combined rewards represents life-changing money. For an accomplice or a peripheral participant whose conscience is already troubled, that sum could be the tipping point. If you have information, any information at all, about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, you are urged to contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. You can also call the Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line at 52035-14900. Tips can also be submitted online at tips.fbi.gov. Additionally, 88 Crime is offering a separate reward of $102,500 for the arrest of those involved. No detail is too small. A vehicle you noticed that night. A person who seemed nervous or out of place. A purchase you witnessed. A conversation you overheard. Something that seemed insignificant at the time could be the thread that unravels this entire case. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. Her family deserves answers. Her community deserves closure. And the person or persons responsible deserve to face the full weight of justice. This story is not over. The cameras may have moved on. The news cycle may have shifted. But in a burnt adobe house in the Catalina Foothills, an 84-year-old woman's life was interrupted violently, deliberately, in the dead of a desert night. And until she is found, until the truth is known, until justice is served, the work continues. For Nancy, for her family, for every person who watched those family videos and felt the anguish in Savannah's voice when she said, "We are at an hour of desperation, and we need your help." We hear her, and we will not stop. Because somewhere between the saguaro cacti and the starlit darkness of the Arizona foothills, the answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie still exists. It may be in a DNA database, waiting to be matched. It may be on a hard drive, waiting to be examined. It may be in someone's memory, waiting to be spoken. And when it emerges, as it must, it will not come from fabricated confessions or invented timelines or AI-generated clickbait. It will come from evidence, from science, from the quiet, relentless work of investigators who have not given up. It will come from truth. And truth, unlike speculation, does not expire. Nancy Guthrie, born January 27th, 1942, a daughter of Kentucky, a wife, a widow, a mother of three, a grandmother, a community leader, a woman of faith, a woman who watched javelinas eat her plants and laughed about it, a woman whose daughter called her God's first, best, and most important gift. She is missing. She has been missing for 64 days, and she deserves to be found. If you know something, say something. If you saw something, report it. If you are the person responsible, it is never too late to do the right thing. This is where the story stands today. Not with a verdict, not with a resolution, but with an ongoing investigation. A family in anguish, a community in prayer, and a nation still watching. We will be here for every development, every update, every answer that finally comes. Because Nancy Guthrie's story is not finished, and neither is ours.